I now want to provide a report on some of the conferences and meetings that we've been attending since the last update. And we were at the All Ontario Chiefs Conference the third week of November, and we started that conference off with the annual meeting of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. This is the fund that oversees the Hydro One shares that are owned by all the First Nations. And the board for this fund is chaired by Gordon Peters from the Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians. And Six Nations representative on that board is Ron Jameson. All of the directors were officially appointed, and we were provided financial statements for the different accounts. And Ron will be providing a report to our community in the spring, and at that time we will provide more information to the community. The Chiefs also talked about the restructuring project for the Chiefs of Ontario and put in place a technicians committee to present some options back to the Chiefs at a special assembly that is planned for April 2019. A presentation was also made by Pat Madobby, former Grand Chief of the Anishinaabe Nation, and Kevin Sandy from Six Nations about the proposed new Ontario sports body. The Chiefs were presented with two options. One was to replace the president and board of the existing organization, which is called the Aboriginal Sports and Wellness Council of Ontario. The other option was to establish a whole new sports body. The point was made that the existing body, known as ASCO, has not been accountable to the Chiefs in Assembly, who gave them the initial mandate to be the Ontario sports body through a resolution in 2010. The resolution was tabled and voted on, and it was passed that the option chosen by the Chiefs was to replace the president and the board. The interim group in place is continuing to work on getting a new board in place, and we'll move forward on that. Gord Peters and Sarah Mainville, who were at the conference, also made a presentation on the Federal Recognitions of Rights framework. The Chiefs passed yet another resolution to reject this framework. After this discussion, there was discussion about a funding formula that is currently being used to distribute funding in Ontario. That formula right now is 50% based on population, 40% base, and 10% for remote communities. A committee was put in place to look at coming up with a new formula, as this is being done at the request of the First Nations in the North, who want a bigger weight on remote. But people were warned that this would be an arduous task and that we would likely not come up with one formula that would make everyone happy. This is particularly concerning to us because we are the largest populated First Nation. Nevertheless, the committee was directed to address all of these outstanding issues, including the large First Nations, Ontario Special Study on Child Welfare, and the remote communities. The Honourable Greg Rickford, the Minister of Indigenous Services, also attended this conference, and he spoke to the Chiefs and took questions after. We at Six Nations are going to be seeking our own meeting with Minister Rickford and inviting him to visit our community. The Political Confederacy also had a meeting with Saul Mamakwa. He is an Indigenous person from Northern Ontario, and he was elected as an NDP MPP. From Northern Ontario, and I have invited him to visit our community in the new year, and we're working on a date. There was also a resolution put forth to seek support for the Ontario Native Firefighters Society and the Six Nations Fire Services to continue to provide training to all First Nations. There was another one to have a separate process for the Aboriginal Institutes Consortium in Ontario to establish their own tripartite process outside of any AFN process to discuss funding for the institutes in Ontario. This includes the Ungohungwe Skills and Trades Technical Centre as well as Six Nations Polytech. Our Fire Chief, Matt Miller, was also present to do a presentation about engagement sessions related to the establishment of an Indigenous Fire Marshal's Office. He expressed concern that the National Firefighters Association is not doing an adequate job on this engagement. He said that the Ontario Native Firefighters Association does not support the process, and they wanted to let the Chiefs know. The next meeting we attended was an Iroquois Caucus, which was held in Ottawa just prior to the Assembly of First Nations. 6 of the 7 Iroquois Caucus communities met in Ottawa then, and the only one missing were the Mohawks of Wata. At the beginning of the meeting, we had representatives of the Sweetgrass First Nations Language Council make a presentation, and they asked for support for their language conference, which is entitled From Cradle to Grave, that would be held at Akwesasne on November 1st and 2nd, 2019. We also had a presentation from Steve Williams from Grand River Enterprises who talked about the amount of excise tax that GRE has to pay to the government every year. It is currently $350 million a year. The Iroquois Caucus is planning to hold a taxation summit in the next year to discuss this and all issues related to taxation. Grand Chief Abram Benedict from Akwesasne then asked the Iroquois communities to work together and meet with the governments to talk about getting a share of the revenue from cannabis. Right now, the provinces get 75% and the feds get 25%, and we get nothing. We also don't want any of the manufacturers, like Seven Leaf at Akwesasne, to be put in the same position as GRE, whereby they have to apply for an excise license and pay an excise tax to the government. It was also mentioned that each community is developing their own regulations, and we need to work together in meeting with the government and exerting our own jurisdiction to do our own regulations and law. We may also want to look at doing an agreement amongst ourselves for trade and commerce. The chiefs agreed to work together by forming a committee of chiefs and technicians who will hold an initial meeting to discuss this further. We will also seek meetings with federal and provincial ministers. We also received reports from a hunting working group and the nuclear waste working group, who are working on trying to stop the transportation of nuclear waste that may be going across our territories. We also received material from Kahnawake, who has been doing a lot of work on Bill S3. This is a membership bill which could see a lot more people added to our membership list. Six Nations could potentially see an additional 70,000 to 100,000 people reinstated. We are trying to get a meeting with an official from Indigenous Services to discuss this bill in more depth so that we will understand what it means and what the implications to our community will be. Once we have that session, we will be able to provide more information to the community. All the communities will also be receiving the terms of reference of the caucus and are actively seeking a new coordinator. Trevor Bomberry from Six Nations has been the coordinator for some time now, but has resigned from this position. So if anyone is interested in this part-time position, please watch for the posting or let my office know.